Marry my ugly daughter or leave my land by sundown. Chief Silas's voice was granite, echoing in the dusty, dim light of the ranch office. Liam stood perfectly still, the worn leather of his Stetson crushed in his grip. Outside, the wind howled across the Dakota plains, a harsh reminder of the men currently hunting him. He had nowhere else to run. Rumors of Olivia, the chief's reclusive, scarred daughter, had poisoned the local whispers for years. They called her cursed, a monster hidden in the attic of the sprawling estate. Liam swallowed the copper taste of fear and pride in his mouth. He looked the formidable Lakota patriarch dead in the eye. "I'll marry her," Liam said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Draw up the papers." The heavy oak door of the patriarch's office clicked shut behind Liam, sounding like a judge's gavel. He stood on the wraparound porch of the main house, letting the biting November wind tear at the collar of his denim jacket. The sprawling expanse of the Iron Mountain Ranch stretched out before him, 50,000 acres of sovereign Lakota territory bleeding into the jagged, snow-capped teeth of the Badlands. It was beautiful. It was brutal. And for the last 3 months, it had been the only thing keeping Liam alive. He walked down the wooden steps, his boots crunching against the frost-heaved gravel. His mind was a turbulent storm, replaying the ultimatum, "Marry my ugly daughter." Liam didn't know much about Olivia Red Bear, but out here, you didn't need to know the truth to know the legend. The ranch hands whispered about her over cheap beer and dying campfires. They said a house fire 12 years ago had taken her mother and left the girl horrifically disfigured. They said her face was melted wax, that her mind had snapped from the pain, and that Silas kept her locked away in the east wing of the manor so the world wouldn't have to look at his greatest failure. In 3 months of breaking wild horses for Silas, Liam had never seen so much as a shadow in the east wing windows. He pushed open the door to the bunkhouse. The blast of warm air, smelling of diesel, wet wool, and stale coffee, hit him immediately. A half-dozen ranch hands were clustered around a battered poker table. The laughter died the second Liam crossed the threshold. Carter, the ranch foreman, leaned back in his chair, a toothpick rolling between his teeth. Carter had never liked Liam. He didn't trust drifters, especially drifters who rode in on a stolen motorcycle with bruised knuckles and a habit of looking over their shoulder. "Well?" Carter drawled, the scrape of his chair loud in the sudden silence. "The old man finally fire you, city boy?" Liam walked to his bunk at the far end of the room. He didn't answer. He reached under his cot and pulled out his canvas duffel bag. "I asked you a question, Liam." Carter pressed, standing up. The other men watched, tension tightening the room like a winch. Liam unzipped the bag. Inside lay 3 pairs of jeans, a few flannels, and a locked metal lockbox that held a .45 caliber pistol and a ledger of debts he could never repay. A syndicate in Vegas was looking for him. If he stepped off sovereign land, they would find him within 48 hours. Silas knew it. Silas had used it. "He didn't fire me," Liam said quietly, not looking up. He began shoving his spare boots into the bag. "Then what are you packing for?" "I'm moving out of the bunkhouse." Liam zipped the bag shut and finally turned to face the foreman. His blue eyes were dead calm, a stark contrast to the exhaustion painted on his features. "I'm moving into the main house." A beat of silence passed. Then one of the younger hands, a kid named Toby, let out a nervous chuckle. "The main house? What, Silas adopting you?" "No," Liam said. He slung the heavy duffel over his shoulder. The weight of it felt like nothing compared to the invisible yoke Silas had just strapped to his neck. "I'm marrying Olivia." The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't just shock. It was profound, chilling horror. Carter's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of genuine pity that made Liam's stomach twist violently. "You're a dead man," Carter whispered, the malice entirely gone from his voice. "If the girl doesn't drive you crazy, the shame will." Liam adjusted the strap on his shoulder. "Beats catching a bullet in Reno," he muttered, brushing past the foreman and walking back out into the freezing Dakota night. The morning of the ceremony broke gray and unforgiving. The sky was the color of bruised iron, threatening snow that refused to fall. Liam had spent the night in a spare guest room on the ground floor of the main house, staring at a ceiling intricately carved with cedar beams, unable to sleep. Every creak of the floorboards above him felt like a threat. At dawn, he didn't wait for a summons. He dressed in his work clothes, walked out to the round pen, and grabbed a lariat. He needed the violence of physical labor to quiet the screaming anxiety in his head. By 8 in the morning, he was in the mud, wrestling with a massive, unbroken roan gelding that Silas had bought at auction a week prior. The horse was pure fury. 1,200 pounds of muscle and teeth, terrified and angry at the world. Liam understood the animal perfectly. He stood in the center of the pen, holding the lead rope, breathing heavily. Sweat froze to his brow despite the freezing temperature. "Easy," Liam murmured, his voice a low, steady rumble. "I know, you're trapped, but fighting it only tightens the rope." A fitting metaphor, wouldn't you agree? Liam didn't flinch. He kept his eyes on the horse as Chief Silas approached the heavy iron gate of the pen. The older man was dressed impeccably, as always. A heavy wool coat over a tailored suit, a silver bolo tie resting against his chest. His long silver-streaked dark hair was tied back in a neat braid. Silas radiated an ancient, immovable authority. "She's quiet today," Silas noted, leaning his forearms against the top rail, watching Liam work the horse. "Who? The horse or your daughter?" Liam asked, snapping the lead rope gently to keep the roan moving in a circle. "Both." Silas's dark eyes narrowed slightly. "You think I'm a monster, Liam. You think I'm selling my own blood to a desperate stray to secure a tax loophole." Liam finally looked at the patriarch. The fragment of truth he had pieced together was simple. Olivia owned the water rights to the Northern Valley, inherited from her late mother's separate trust. By tribal law and the convoluted stipulations of the trust, control of those rights transferred fully only upon her marriage or her 30th birthday. Silas needed the water rights now to secure a massive cattle contract. He needed a proxy, a puppet. "I don't think you're a monster, Silas," Liam said, his breath pluming in the cold air. "I think you're a businessman. You bought my debt, you bought my life. I don't care what she looks like. I'll sign the papers, I'll play the husband, and I'll stay out of her way. That was the deal." Silas stared at him for a long, heavy moment. There was something unreadable in the older man's expression. It wasn't triumph. It looked suspiciously like regret. "She hasn't spoken to a man besides me and her doctor in 12 years, Silas said quietly. The wind whipped between them, carrying the scent of impending snow. "Do not expect a wife. Do not expect gratitude. Do not touch her. If you force yourself on her, or if you try to use her to get out of our arrangement, Reno will be the least of your worries. I will bury you in the hills myself." "Understood," Liam said. Silas pushed off the fence. "The elders arrive at sunset. Clean yourself up. There's a suit in your room." As Silas walked away, Liam wiped the sweat from his eyes and glanced up at the imposing structure of the manor. His gaze was drawn to the east wing. There, behind the glass of a third-story window, a heavy velvet curtain fell perfectly still. But Liam had seen it move. He had felt the weight of someone watching him. A cold shiver, entirely unrelated to the weather, tracked down Liam's spine. He turned his attention back to the wild, thrashing horse, wishing he could run alongside it. The great room of the Red Bear estate was a testament to power. Massive elk antler chandeliers cast a warm, flickering glow over polished stone floors and towering walls adorned with historical artifacts and modern art. A roaring fire cracked in a hearth large enough to stand in. Yet, for all its warmth, the room felt like a tomb. Liam stood near the hearth, tugging uncomfortably at the collar of his black suit. It fit well enough, but it felt like armor he didn't know how to wear. The room was populated by about 20 people, the inner circle of the tribal council, a few high-ranking ranch managers, and the magistrate who would legalize the union. They spoke in hushed, tense murmurs. No one looked Liam in the eye. They looked at him like he was a sacrifice. Silas stood near the magistrate, his face a mask of stoic authority. He checked his heavy gold pocket watch. The fire popped violently. Then, the heavy oak double doors at the far end of the room groaned open. The murmuring died instantly. The silence was so profound, Liam could hear his own pulse thundering in his ears. She was flanked by two elderly women, Silas's sisters. But Liam's eyes were locked solely on his bride. Olivia Redbear moved with a slow, deliberate grace that defied the rumors of a broken, hobbling creature. She was dressed in a breathtakingly intricate traditional elk-tooth dress, the bone-white teeth clattering softly against the heavy dark wool with every step. But it was her face, or the lack thereof, that made Liam's breath hitch. A heavy, tightly woven black veil cascaded from a beaded crown, completely obscuring her head, face, and shoulders. It was a shroud. It was deeply unsettling, a visual manifestation of the isolation and trauma the entire county whispered about. As she stopped a few feet in front of Liam, the air around her felt electric, crackling with an almost suffocating tension. She didn't tremble. She stood perfectly, rigidly straight. The magistrate cleared his throat, clearly unnerved. He rushed through the legalities, his voice wavering slightly. Silas stepped forward, his expression tight, and spoke a few words in Lakota, a traditional blessing that felt hollow in the heavy air. "The documents are signed," the magistrate finally squeaked out, closing his leather binder. You may unveil the bride." Liam swallowed hard. This was it, the moment of truth. He prepared himself to look upon whatever ruined flesh had kept this woman a prisoner for over a decade. He swore to himself he wouldn't flinch. He owed her that basic human dignity. He stepped forward. The scent of sweetgrass, wood smoke, and something sharp, like ozone, drifted from her. Liam raised his hands. His knuckles were bruised, his calluses rough against the fine silk of the veil. He gripped the fabric and slowly lifted it over her head. The veil fell away, pooling around her shoulders. A collective, sharp gasp tore through the room. A woman behind Liam dropped her champagne flute. It shattered against the stone floor with a deafening crash. Silas took a sudden, shocked half-step backward, his mask of control slipping completely. Liam froze, his hands still hovering in the air. He was looking at a monster, but not the kind anyone had expected. Olivia was not deformed. She had a scar, a jagged, silvery, lightning strike line that tracked from her left temple, slicing through her eyebrow and down the edge of her jaw. But it didn't ruin her face. It framed it. She possessed a devastating, aristocratic beauty. High, sharp cheekbones, flawless bronze skin, and a strong, regal jawline. But it wasn't her beauty that shocked the room. It was her eyes. They were obsidian, burning with a cold, lethal fury that could freeze boiling water. And painted across those eyes, stark and terrifying against her skin, was a broad, jagged smear of crimson war paint. She hadn't been hiding because she was ashamed. Before Liam could fully process the sight, Olivia's hand moved in a blur. Something flashed silver in the firelight. A heavy, bone-handled hunting knife slammed into the wooden table between them, burying itself an inch into the hardwood with a loud thwack. The room erupted into panicked shouts. The elders recoiled. Olivia didn't look at them. Her blazing eyes remained locked onto Liam's, promising absolute destruction. She leaned in, her voice a low, raspy whisper that cut through the chaos in the room, meant only for him. "If you ever touch me without my permission," she breathed, her lips curling into a vicious sneer, "I won't just kill you, cowboy. I'll make it hurt." Liam looked from the trembling knife to the terrifying, beautiful woman standing before him. The realization hit him like a freight train. The rumors, the isolation, the ugly lie. Silas hadn't been hiding a broken victim. Silas had been trying to cage a predator, and Liam had just been locked inside with her. The heavy oak table still shuddered slightly from the force of the blade. The elders remained frozen, their expressions trapped somewhere between outrage and primal terror. Silas's face had drained of all color, the silver in his hair suddenly matching the ashen hue of his skin. The illusion of his total control had just been violently shattered in front of his most important allies. Liam didn't look at the chief. He kept his eyes on Olivia. She hadn't moved. She stood there, the crimson war paint stark against her flawless skin, her chest rising and falling in slow, measured breaths. She wasn't having a breakdown. She was establishing dominance. Slowly, deliberately, Liam reached down. His calloused fingers wrapped around the bone handle of the hunting knife. He wrenched it free from the hardwood with a sharp crack. He didn't offer it back to her handle first. He flipped it, catching the heavy blade expertly, and held it out, presenting the handle to her. "Lead the way," Liam said. His voice was completely level. A microscopic shift occurred in Olivia's obsidian eyes. It wasn't warmth, nor was it trust. It was the cold, calculating assessment of a predator realizing its prey might have teeth. She snatched the knife from his grip, the movement so fast it stirred the air between them, and turned on her heel. Liam followed her out of the great room, leaving a suffocating silence in their wake. The walk to the east wing was a study in isolation. As they climbed the grand, sweeping staircase, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The plush carpets of the main house gave way to bare, polished mahogany floorboards. At the end of a long, dimly lit corridor stood a heavy, iron-reinforced door. It looked less like a bedroom door and more like the entrance to a vault. Olivia produced a heavy brass key from the folds of her elk-toothed dress, unlocked the door, and pushed it open. Liam stepped inside and stopped dead in his tracks. He had expected a prison. He had expected the neglected, dusty attic of a discarded daughter. Instead, he was standing in a tactical command center that doubled as a sanctuary. The walls were lined not with vanity mirrors or porcelain dolls, but with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves overflowing with texts on hydrology, law, and tribal history. A massive oak drafting table dominated the center of the room, buried under topographical maps of the Iron Mountain Ranch and the surrounding Badlands. In the corner, meticulously cleaned and oiled, rested a scoped Winchester hunting rifle and a compound bow. "Close the door," Olivia commanded, her back to him. Liam pushed the heavy door shut. The click of the deadbolt sounded unnervingly final. She walked to a small basin in the corner and began scrubbing the red paint from her eyes with a coarse cloth. "There is a cot in the dressing room," she said, her voice muffled by the towel. "You will sleep there. You will not enter the main room after 10 at night. You will not touch my maps, you will not ask about my mother, and you will never, under any circumstances, speak for me." Liam dropped his canvas duffel onto the floor. The heavy thud echoed in the cavernous space. He unzipped it and pulled out his metal lockbox. Olivia lowered the towel. The paint was gone, revealing the stark beauty of her face and the jagged silver scar that cut through her eyebrow. She watched him intently as he keyed the combination to the box. When the lid popped open, revealing the cold, blued steel of his .45 caliber pistol, the room grew dead quiet. Liam took the gun out, checked the chamber out of pure muscle memory, and set it carefully on top of the box. He met her gaze. "I don't care about your maps," Liam said, his tone devoid of aggression but completely unyielding. "I don't care about the rumors they spread about you downstairs. Silas bought my debt. He needed a warm body to sign a piece of paper so he could get your water rights, and I needed a place where the Vegas syndicate couldn't put a bullet in the back of my head. We are cellmates, Olivia. Nothing more." She stared at the gun, then back to his face. For the first time since the veil fell, the murderous edge in her eyes softened into something resembling dangerous curiosity. "They told me you were a drifter," she murmured. "A stray dog my father picked up off the highway." "I am," Liam replied, picking up his duffel and heading toward the small dressing room. "But I'm not on his leash." The following morning, the tension on the Iron Mountain Ranch was thick enough to choke on. The snow had finally begun to fall, a blinding, driving squall that coated the Dakota plains in brilliant white. Liam hadn't slept. The cot in the dressing room was brutally uncomfortable, but it was the profound silence of the East Wing that kept him awake. It was the silence of a held breath. He had left the suite before dawn, navigating the sprawling manor like a ghost, preferring the freezing brutality of the stables to the suffocating luxury of the house. He was pitching hay into the stalls when the heavy barn doors groaned open. Carter, the ranch foreman, stepped inside, flanked by two of the larger ranch hands. The snow swirling behind them looked like a halo of white static. "Well, well," Carter sneered, slapping a riding crop against his thigh. "The groom survives his wedding night. We had a betting pool going. I had my money on her slitting your throat before midnight." Liam didn't stop pitching hay. "You lose, Carter. Pay up." Carter's smile didn't reach his eyes. He stepped closer, entering Liam's personal space. The smell of cheap tobacco and stale coffee rolled off him. "You think because you got a ring on your finger you're untouchable now? You think you're one of them?" "I think I have work to do," Liam said, finally pausing. He leaned his weight against the pitchfork. "Things are changing, city boy," Carter said, his voice dropping an octave. "I got a call on the satellite phone last night. A guy from Nevada. Asked if we had a mechanic matching your description working the rigs. Said there was a $20,000 finder's fee for a confirmed location." A cold spike of adrenaline pierced Liam's chest. The syndicate had tracked him to the state line faster than he had anticipated. If they knew he was on the reservation, it was only a matter of time before they paid someone enough to look the other way. "What did you tell him?" Liam asked, his voice dead flat. Carter grinned, revealing stained teeth. "I told him the lines were bad and hung up. But 20 grand is a lot of money, Liam, especially for a guy who just married the town monster. Silas wants you in his office. Now! I suggest you don't keep him waiting. You need friends right now, and you ain't got any here." Liam jammed the pitchfork into the hay bale. He walked past Carter, deliberately brushing the foreman's shoulder hard enough to knock him off balance, and headed out into the blizzard. Silas's office was stiflingly warm, smelling of expensive cigars and old leather. The chief sat behind his massive mahogany desk, a thick stack of legal documents resting precisely in the center of the blotter. He didn't look up when Liam entered. "Sit," Silas commanded. Liam remained standing. "Carter says you wanted to see me." Silas finally raised his eyes. The embarrassment of the previous night was gone, replaced by a ruthless, businesslike sheen. The theatrics yesterday were unfortunate. Olivia has always possessed a flair for the dramatic. It is a symptom of her condition. "She isn't crazy, Silas," Liam said quietly. "She's angry." Silas's jaw tightened. "Her emotional state is irrelevant. You are legally her husband. Under the tribal stipulations of her mother's trust, you now have joint signatory power over the Northern Valley water rights. I need you to sign these preliminary lease agreements." Silas pushed a gold fountain pen across the desk. Liam looked at the pen, then at the documents. He didn't reach for either. Instead, he leaned over the desk, placed his hands flat on the wood, and began to read the top page upside down. He wasn't a lawyer, but he had spent enough time reading bad contracts to spot a death warrant. "This isn't a lease," Liam said, his eyes scanning the dense paragraphs. "This is a diversion mandate. You're rerouting the entire northern aquifer to feed the new commercial feedlots on the south border." "It is a necessary expansion," Silas said smoothly. "It will drain the northern valley dry in 3 years, Liam countered, looking up. "You'll turn 50,000 acres of ancestral grazing land into a dust bowl." "That land is useless," Silas snapped, his voice rising, cracking the veneer of his calm. "It belonged to her mother's family. A family that fought me at every turn. It generates no revenue. The beef contract will secure this tribe's financial future for a century." "Does Olivia know?" "Olivia does not understand the complexities of modern commerce." Silas slammed his fist onto the desk. "She is a child playing with maps in a locked room. You owe me your life, Liam. I bought your debt. If you step off this ranch, the men looking for you will cut you to pieces. Sign the paper." Liam looked at the gold pen. He thought about the Vegas syndicate. He thought about Carter, ready to sell him out for 20 grand. He was completely trapped. Slowly, Liam picked up the pen. Silas leaned back, a tight, victorious smile touching his lips. Liam uncapped the pen, looked Silas dead in the eye, and snapped the gold barrel cleanly in half. Ink splattered across the polished mahogany. I signed up to be a husband, Liam whispered, dropping the broken pieces onto the desk. Not an executioner. If you want her mother's valley, you have her ask me for it. He turned and walked out, leaving the chief in a stunned, raging silence. The storm had escalated into a whiteout by the time Liam made it back to the main house. The wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the massive pane-glass windows of the manor. His hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the realization of what he had just done. He had just declared war on the only man standing between him and a shallow grave. He didn't go to the great room. He bypassed the kitchens. He climbed the stairs, the muscles in his back tight, anticipating a bullet through the window at any moment. He unlocked the heavy iron door of the east wing and slipped inside. The room was dimly lit by a single desk lamp. Olivia was hunched over her massive drafting table, a red grease pencil in her hand, tracing lines across a topographical map. She didn't look up when the door locked behind him. Liam didn't speak. He walked to the dressing room, stripped off his snow-soaked jacket, and sat heavily on the edge of his cot. The adrenaline was draining out of him, leaving a hollow, aching exhaustion in its wake. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the grit and dirt of the stables. 10 minutes passed in total silence. Only the scratch of her pencil and the howling wind outside filled the void. "You're bleeding." Liam looked up. Olivia was standing in the doorway of the dressing room. She wasn't holding a knife this time. She was looking at his hands. Liam glanced down. In his anger, when he had snapped the gold fountain pen, a jagged piece of the metal barrel had sliced deep into the meat of his palm. He had been so pumped with adrenaline, he hadn't even felt it. Dark blood was steadily dripping onto the floorboards, pooling near the toe of his boot. "It's nothing," Liam muttered, grabbing a relatively clean shirt from his duffel and pressing it against his palm. "Just a scratch." Olivia didn't leave. She stepped into the small room. The scent of sweet grass and ozone enveloped him again. She reached out, her fingers cold and surprisingly gentle, and pulled the improvised bandage away from his hand. "That needs stitches," she said flatly. "If it infects, you'll lose the hand. I won't have a cripple dragging his feet through my wing." Before he could argue, she turned and walked to a heavy wooden cabinet near her drafting table. She returned a moment later with a first aid kit that looked like it had been stolen from a military surplus store. She pulled up a wooden stool, sitting dangerously close to him. "Give me your hand." Liam hesitated, then extended his arm. She cleaned the wound with a splash of iodine that made him grit his teeth, her movements efficient and completely devoid of squeamishness. "Silas sent Carter to threaten me today," Liam said quietly, watching the silver needle pierce his skin. Olivia didn't flinch. She pulled the black thread tight. "Carter is a dog. He barks when Silas tells him to. He told me to sign the diversion mandate." The needle stopped. Olivia's entire body went rigid. The silence in the room suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. She slowly looked up from his hand, her obsidian eyes locking onto his. The mask of cold indifference she wore was slipping, revealing a raw, terrifying desperation underneath. "The northern aquifer," she whispered. "He wants to drain it for the south border feedlots," Liam confirmed. He had the papers drawn up. "He needed my signature as your proxy." Olivia's breathing hitched. She looked away, her jaw clenching so hard Liam thought her teeth might crack. "My mother spent her entire life protecting that valley," she said, her voice hollow. "It's the only pristine water source left on the reservation. If he drains it, it all dies. The wild horses, the grazing land, everything." She looked back at him, the lethal fury returning, aimed entirely at him. "So, you sold me out to save your own skin. Did he promise to pay off your Vegas debts?" "I didn't sign it." The words hung in the air. Olivia stared at him, her eyes wide, searching his face for the lie. "What?" "I broke his pen," Liam said, a humorless, exhausted smile touching the corner of his mouth. "Told him if he wanted the valley, you had to ask me for it." Olivia looked down at the blood on his hand, then back up to his eyes. For the first time, she truly saw him. He wasn't a drifter playing a role. He was a man who had just thrown himself onto a grenade for a woman who had threatened to gut him 24 hours earlier. "You're a fool," Olivia whispered, finishing the last stitch with a trembling hand. "He will kill you for that." "I know," Liam said, leaning back against the cold wall. "But at least I won't be bored." Olivia tied off the suture and snipped the thread. She didn't move away immediately. She looked at his bruised knuckles, the exhaustion carving lines into his face. "There's a false panel in the floorboards under the drafting table," Olivia said softly, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Inside is a satellite phone on a scrambled frequency. The Vegas men. If you need to make a call to buy yourself time, use it." It was an olive branch, a massive, dangerous concession of trust. "Thank you," Liam said. Olivia stood up, her posture rigid once more. "Don't thank me, cowboy. If Silas sends his men up here to take that signature by force, I expect you to be able to pull a trigger. Now go to sleep." She turned the desk lamp off, plunging the room into darkness, leaving Liam alone with the throbbing pain in his hand and the sudden, terrifying realization that he was no longer fighting just for his own survival. By midnight, the temperature in the east wing had plummeted. The baseboard heaters hissed and died, plunging the vast room into a freezing, suffocating stillness. Silas had cut the power. It was a crude, brutal tactic, meant to freeze them out or force a surrender. Liam sat on the edge of his cot in the pitch-black dressing room, his .45 resting heavy and cold across his knees. He had wrapped a thick wool blanket around his shoulders, his breath pluming in the darkness like faint wisps of smoke. In the main room, he could hear the faint, methodical shh of a whetstone gliding along the edge of a blade. Olivia wasn't sleeping either. "They won't wait until morning," Liam said, his voice carrying easily through the open doorway. "Silas is losing face with every hour he doesn't have that signature. He'll send Carter." The grinding of the whetstone stopped. "The door is reinforced steel wrapped in oak," Olivia's voice floated back, calm and utterly devoid of fear. "They cannot break it down without explosives, and Silas loves this house too much to blow it up." "Carter isn't known for his restraint," Liam replied, thumbing the safety on his pistol on and off, the metallic clicks loud in the quiet. "And $20,000 is a lot of motivation to get creative." As if summoned by the words, the heavy thud of boots echoed from the long corridor outside. Not one set of footsteps, 3. Heavy, deliberate, and lacking any attempt at stealth. Liam stood up, letting the blanket drop to the floor. He stepped into the main room. The moonlight reflecting off the snow outside cast long skeletal shadows through the frosted window panes. Olivia was already standing behind the massive oak drafting table, which she had tipped onto its side to form a barricade facing the door. In her hands, she held the Winchester hunting rifle, her eye resting comfortably behind the scope. "Get behind the wood," she ordered softly. Liam moved to her side, crouching behind the thick oak. The doorknob rattled violently. When it didn't give, a heavy fist pounded against the wood. "Open it up, city boy." Carter's muffled voice slurred through the heavy timber. He sounded drunk, running on liquid courage and greed. "The chief wants his papers signed, and I'm here to collect my finder's fee." "Go back to the bunkhouse, Carter," Liam shouted back, leveling his pistol at the center of the door. "You don't want to die for a cattle contract." A harsh laugh echoed from the hall. "I ain't dying tonight, but I'll tell you what, Liam, Silas didn't just cut the power. He opened the main gates, said he didn't care who came driving up the mountain as long as they took the trash out when they left." A jolt of pure ice spiked through Liam's veins. He looked at Olivia. Even in the pale moonlight, he could see her jaw tighten. Silas had invited the Vegas syndicate onto sovereign land. He had unleashed a pack of rabid dogs just to get his way. "They're halfway up the ridge right now," Carter sneered through the door. "2 black SUVs. Now you can open this door, sign the paper, and Silas will put you in a chopper to Canada. Or you can sit there and let the Nevada boys peel your skin off. Your choice." "He's lying," Olivia whispered, never taking her eye off the scope. "Silas is ruthless, but he wouldn't bring outside cartel men onto the reservation. The tribal police would string him up." "He's desperate," Liam countered, his heart hammering against his ribs. and desperate men burn down their own houses to kill a rat. A sudden deafening crack splintered the air. A crowbar smashed through the decorative wood paneling next to the iron deadbolt. Carter was trying to pry the frame loose. Liam didn't hesitate. He raised the .45, aimed 2 feet below the crowbar, and pulled the trigger. The gunshot in the enclosed space was catastrophic. The muzzle flash illuminated the room in a strobe of violent yellow light. The heavy slug punched cleanly through the door. A scream of pure agony erupted from the hallway, followed by the heavy thud of a body hitting the floorboards. "He shot me! The crazy bastard shot me!" Carter howled. Footsteps scrambled in panic as the remaining ranch hands dragged their foreman away. The silence rushed back in, leaving Liam's ears ringing violently. He lowered the gun, the smell of cordite thick and acrid in the freezing air. He looked over at Olivia. She slowly lowered the Winchester, staring at him with a mixture of shock and profound, undeniable respect. "Well," Liam breathed, his chest heaving, "I guess negotiations are over." "We have to move," Olivia said, her voice sharp and immediate. She slung the Winchester over her shoulder and grabbed her compound bow from the corner. "Carter's men will regroup, and if those SUVs are real, we are sitting in a dead end." "The windows?" Liam asked, checking his magazine. "A 3-story drop into a frozen courtyard. We'd break our legs." Olivia moved swiftly to the back wall of the east wing, scanning the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. My mother didn't trust Silas, even back then. She knew the history of this house better than he did. She reached for a heavy leather-bound volume on tribal law, gripped the top of the shelf, and pulled down hard. A loud metallic clack resonated behind the wall, followed by the groan of ancient hinges. The entire bookcase swung outward, revealing a narrow, pitch-black passageway smelling of dry rot and old cedar. "Servant tunnels," Olivia explained, slipping into the darkness. "Built in the 20s, they bypass the main corridors and lead straight down behind the walls of the great room. Keep your hand on the wall and stay close." Liam followed her into the suffocating darkness, the heavy bookcase clicking shut behind them. The air was stale, thick with a century of undisturbed dust. They moved single file down a steep, narrow staircase that seemed to spiral endlessly into the bowels of the manor. Liam's injured hand throbbed with every step, the stitches pulling tight, but the sheer adrenaline kept the pain at bay. As they descended, muffled voices began to bleed through the wooden planks to their right. They were nearing the ground floor. Olivia stopped suddenly, holding a hand up in the darkness. Liam bumped lightly into her shoulder. Through a slatted vent near the floor, a sliver of firelight spilled into the hidden tunnel. They crouched down, peering through the wooden grates into the great room. The scene below was pure chaos. Silas stood by the roaring hearth, looking disheveled and frantic. Standing opposite him were 3 men wearing heavy winter coats that did a poor job of hiding the tactical gear beneath them. They weren't ranch hands. They moved with the terrifying, relaxed efficiency of professional killers. "You said he was cornered." The lead man, a broad-shouldered enforcer Liam recognized from a terrifying night in Reno, barked, his voice a gravelly rasp. "You said we roll in, grab the mechanic, and roll out." "My foreman is bleeding out in the kitchen," Silas shouted back, his authoritative facade entirely shattered. "He has a gun, and he's barricaded in the east wing with my daughter. You go up there, you force him to sign these papers, and then you can have him." "We don't give a damn about your water papers, Chief," the enforcer sneered, pulling a suppressed submachine gun from under his coat. "We're going up there, we're shooting through the door, and we're taking his head back in a cooler. If your daughter is in the way, that's your problem." Silas lunged forward. "You will not touch her." The enforcer backhanded Silas across the face with the heavy steel of the gun. The chief crumpled to the stone floor, completely neutralized. "Let's go," the enforcer signaled to his men. Behind the wall, Liam's blood turned to ice. "I have to draw them away," he whispered to Olivia. "If I step out, they'll follow me into the snow." "You won't make it to the door," Olivia said, her voice a terrifying whisper. She reached down, pulling a heavy hunting arrow from her quiver. She knocked it onto the compound bow. "This is my house. These are my people's lands. No one bleeds on them without my permission." Before Liam could stop her, Olivia kicked the hidden panel outward. It crashed to the floor of the great room with a thunderous clatter. The three Vegas men spun around, raising their weapons toward the dark hole in the wall. Olivia stepped out of the shadows, her elk-tooth dress swaying, the compound bow drawn back to her cheek. She didn't hesitate. Thwip. The heavy, steel-tipped arrow crossed the room in a blur, driving straight through the shoulder of the enforcer's heavy coat and pinning him violently to the oak paneling behind him. He dropped his weapon, screaming as the shaft locked him in place. The other two men raised their guns, but Liam was already out of the tunnel. He dove behind a heavy leather sofa, raising his .45. He fired twice. The deafening cracks echoed off the vaulted ceilings. One man went down, clutching his shattered kneecap. The third man panicked, firing wildly at the sofa, shredding leather and stuffing. Liam kept his head down, waiting for a break in the gunfire. Suddenly, the front doors of the manor exploded open in a shower of snow and wind. Red and blue lights flashed frantically against the blizzard outside. 5 tribal police officers swarmed into the great room, shotguns raised. "Drop it! Drop the weapons now!" The remaining Vegas thug looked at the police, looked at his pinned boss, and slowly lowered his gun to the floor, kicking it away. The siege was over. Dawn broke clear and blindingly bright. The storm had passed, leaving the Iron Mountain Ranch buried under 3 feet of pristine, glittering snow. The great room was quiet, save for the crackle of the dying fire and the crunch of glass underfoot. The police had hauled the Vegas men away in cuffs. An ambulance had taken Carter and the wounded thugs to the county hospital under guard. Silas sat in a heavy leather armchair, a bruised swelling blooming across his cheek. He looked utterly defeated. The tribal elders had arrived before sunrise, summoned by the police chief. After taking one look at the cartel men and the blood on the floor, they had formally suspended Silas's authority, pending a full council review. His empire was gone. Liam stood by the window, watching the sun crest over the Badlands. His duffel bag was slung over his shoulder. The Vegas syndicate was effectively neutralized. The arrest of their top enforcer on federal tribal lands would put the heat on them for years. Liam was a ghost again. His debt was gone. He was free. He heard the soft clatter of elk teeth behind him. Olivia walked into the room. She was holding the stack of diversion mandate papers. Without a word to her father, she walked to the hearth and tossed the entire stack onto the glowing embers. They caught instantly, curling into ash. The Northern Valley was safe. She turned and looked at Liam. The crimson war paint was gone. The heavy veil was nowhere to be seen. She looked exhausted, battered, and breathtakingly beautiful. The plow cleared the main road. Olivia said quietly, "The police chief said he'd give you a ride to the bus station in town." Liam gripped the strap of his duffel. He looked at the vast, snow-covered plains outside, then back to the woman who had fought beside him in the dark. The freedom he had been running toward for 3 years suddenly felt incredibly empty. "Yeah," Liam said, his voice rough. "I suppose that was the deal. Sign the papers or leave." "The papers are burned," Olivia pointed out. "Then I guess I have to leave." Liam took a step toward the door, every fiber of his being fighting the movement. "Liam," he stopped. He turned slowly to face her. Olivia crossed the room, stepping over the shattered glass. She stopped inches from him. She reached up, her cool fingers lightly tracing the bruised, exhausted lines of his face, coming to rest gently against his jaw. It was the first time she had initiated contact. Her touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to his chest. "Silas forced a drifter to marry a monster," Olivia whispered, her obsidian eyes searching his. The jagged silver scar caught the morning light, a beautiful testament to her survival. "But Silas isn't chief anymore, and I am done hiding in the East Wing." Liam's heart hammered against his ribs. He dropped his duffel bag. It hit the floor with a soft thud. "I don't have anywhere to be," Liam murmured, his voice thick with emotion. He reached up, his calloused hand gently covering hers where it rested against his cheek. "And I happen to be a pretty good mechanic, if you need one." A slow, genuine smile broke across Olivia's face, entirely transforming her. It was radiant. It was a sunrise. "The Northern Valley needs a lot of work," she said softly, stepping into his space. "I could use a partner." Liam leaned in, closing the remaining distance between them. When their lips met, there was no hesitation, no fear, and no pretense. It was a kiss forged in fire, sealed in blood, and anchored by a profound, unbreakable respect. The drifter had finally found his home, and the fierce protector of the Lakota Plains had finally found an equal. The storm outside had finally broken, giving way to a brilliant, unyielding dawn. Liam and Olivia stood together, the ashes of corrupt contracts cold in the hearth behind them. They had survived the hitmen, the betrayal, and the crushing weight of Silas's ambition. In the end, the ugly daughter was the fiercest protector Iron Mountain had ever seen, and the drifter was the only man brave enough to stand by her side. Their story wasn't just about survival. It was about claiming their own destiny from the ruins of a broken empire. The week following the siege of the Great Room was defined by an eerie, fragile quiet. The massive Iron Mountain Ranch, once a bustling epicenter of Silas's iron-fisted commerce, felt like a ghost town, holding its breath. The tribal council had moved swiftly. Silas was stripped of his title and confined under house arrest in the west wing of the manor, pending federal and tribal investigations. Carter and the Vegas men were sitting in federal lockup. But for Liam, the silence wasn't peaceful. It felt like the unnerving calm in the eye of a hurricane. He lay beneath the chassis of a rusted John Deere tractor in the main barn, the smell of grease and cold earth grounding him. The gash on his palm was healing, a tight, itchy reminder of the night his life had irrevocably changed. He wrenched a stubborn bolt tight, his muscles protesting the strain. "You're stripping the threads." Liam jumped slightly, his wrench clattering against the concrete floor. He slid out from under the tractor on the creeper. Olivia stood in the doorway of the barn, silhouetted by the pale winter sun. She wore a heavy canvas work jacket over a thick wool sweater, her dark hair braided tightly down her back. The jagged silver scar traversing her eye caught the light, a stark badge of honor rather than a mark of shame. "I was getting it seated," Liam argued mildly, sitting up and wiping his grease-stained hands on a rag. "You were fighting it," Olivia corrected, walking over. She handed him a thermos of black coffee. The council finished their preliminary audit this morning. Silas had leveraged almost everything. The cattle, the heavy machinery, even the timber rights on the eastern slope. The only thing untouched is the Northern Valley water. Liam unscrewed the thermos, letting the steam warm his face. "So, we're broke. We are land-rich and cash-poor," she said, leaning against the massive rear tire of the tractor. Her obsidian eyes scanned the empty barn. Most of the ranch hands loyal to Carter had packed up and left in the middle of the night, unwilling to work for a woman they had spent years demonizing. "I need to sell off the commercial feedlot equipment to pay the property taxes, and we need to repair the Northern Aquifers pump station before the spring thaw, or we lose the wild grazing herds." Liam took a sip of the bitter coffee. He looked at her, truly looking at the strength it took to stand in the ruins of her father's legacy, and immediately start calculating how to rebuild. "Then we fix the pump station," Liam said simply. Olivia looked down at him, her expression softening infinitesimally. "It's a two-man job, Liam, and we don't have a crew." "You have me," he said, holding her gaze. For a moment, the heavy tension of the ranch melted away. The space between them, normally filled with tactical assessments and survival instincts, hummed with a quiet, powerful intimacy. Since the morning after the shootout, they had navigated each other carefully. The kiss they had shared was a blazing promise, but the reality of their situation required a cold, hard focus. Before Olivia could respond, the crunch of tires on gravel shattered the moment. Liam was on his feet instantly, his hand instinctively dropping toward the small of his back, even though he had left the 45 in the east wing. A battered, rust-eaten pickup truck idled near the corral. A man stepped out. He wasn't tribal police, and he didn't look like a Vegas enforcer. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, wearing worn denim and a faded Carhartt jacket. He walked with a slight limp. Olivia's posture went rigid. She didn't reach for a weapon, but the absolute stillness of her body told Liam everything he needed to know. She was preparing for a fight. "Miss Redbear," the man called out, removing his worn Stetson. His voice was gravelly, carrying easily across the frosty yard. "Name is Elias Thorne. Heard from town you were short-handed. Heard you were looking for men who know how to work without asking too many questions." Liam stepped slightly in front of Olivia. "Who told you that?" Thorne met Liam's eyes, a cold, empty look that didn't match the humble posture. "A man in a bar in Rapid City said the chief got himself locked up and the new management needed fence menders. I need the work, you need the hands.